The First World War was one of the most destructive and bloodiest wars in modern history, sometimes overshadowed by the Second World War. But we can never forget the immense amount of human life that was lost during the 4 years that the conflict took place. Behind me are the graves of 7,192 German soldiers who lost their lives during the First World War. This is the German cemetery at Montaigu, and it is two cemeteries, Montaigu I and Montaigu II. In this video, we're going to go take a look at both of them and try to learn some of the stories of some of the individuals who are buried here. When you come to a cemetery like this, you actually feel the immense tragedy that this conflict was. And that's why it's important to come to places like this so we can learn about them.
Here in this area, there are two different German war cemeteries from the First World War, Montaigu I and Montaigu II. They are connected to the same battlefield story, but they were created in very different ways, and that is what makes them worth looking at together. Montaigu I is the larger of the two, and that is where I want to begin. It was established by German troops during the First World War and mainly received the dead from the eastern section of the Chemin-des-Dames. But after the war, it changed dramatically. The French authorities expanded it by bringing in the German dead from around 60 surrounding towns and districts, which is why this cemetery became so large. Today, 7,193 German war dead are buried here. Of those, 5,403 lie in individual graves, while another 1,790 are buried in the communal grave. Among them are 17 Jewish soldiers are also buried here, and their graves are marked with a stone sillet instead of crosses. Montaigu II tells a different story. It is much smaller, with 632 German dead, and in many ways it feels closer to the war itself. That's because it was established by German troops in February 1917, and the last burial here took place in the beginning of October 1918. Most of the men buried here were killed or died of wounds in the fighting around the Chemin-des-Dames, but what makes Montaigu II especially important is that after the war, it was mostly left alone. Aside from two bodies found later, the French authorities did not carry out major reburials there, which means it remains in large part a wartime cemetery from its original form. So even though these two cemeteries are connected to the same fighting, they are not the same, and together they show the two sides of the same loss. One cemetery is shaped by later reburials, and the other still preserves much more of the reality of the wartime burial itself. Today, these sites are cared for by the Volksbund, the German War Graves Commission. After the Franco-German War Graves Agreement of July 19, 1966, the Volksbund took on the long-term care of German First World War cemeteries in France. Today, it looks after around 830 war cemeteries in 45 different countries, preserving them as places of remembrance and learning.
Now that we've talked a little bit about the context of the cemetery here, let's focus in on two of the individuals who are buried here and learn their story. One of the men buried here at Montaigu I is Magnus Dolp. He was born on the 6th of September, 1892 in Hausen, Bavaria, and was the son of a farmer. During the First World War, he served in the 1st Company of the 17th Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiment and was awarded the Iron Cross 2nd Class for his actions. Magnus Dolp died on the 31st of October, 1917, after suffering severe wounds during the Regengard fighting south in the area of the Pinon Wood. He died at the main dressing station behind the lines. And today he was buried here at Montaigu I in Block 3, grave number 358. When you're walking amongst the rows of crosses at any war cemetery, sometimes you'll find little extra personal details added to the crosses. For example, I found one right here of a German soldier of Polish origins, and the family left a note here. I'm going to go ahead and read the description for you. It says that English at the bottom, "Dear Grandpa, the war took you away from us at such a young age. You didn't find out that you were a father. Your son, Jan Marian, was born on the 19th of August, 1918. You have 2 granddaughters, Maria and Urusula, and 6 great-grandchildren and 6 great-great-grandchildren. It took us 100 years to learn about your resting place and came here to light a symbolic candle. We remember you, family from Pluzon, Poland, 16th of August, 2024. That is an amazing story. If Jan Nowicki's family ever watches this video, I want to thank you for adding this extra piece of information for us visitors so we can learn a little bit about this man's history. Little personal touches like this really just makes the human story come alive. Like, it really hones on the fact that these are individual people who, you know, the ending of their life didn't just affect them, it affected their families, not only that generation, but the generation to come, just like the story tells us. And I emphasize this a lot in my videos, but this is really the important reason why you should come to places like this, because these aren't just soldiers, these are human beings, and they gave their ultimate sacrifice by giving their life in an absolutely horrendous, brutal conflict that shaped the modern world. And it doesn't matter on what side that these men fought for, the individual people should be remembered, because it impacts, the impacts of this war are still felt to this day, just like that message that Jan's family wrote. So if you're Jan's family and you're ever watching this video, thank you for providing that information. Thank you. So one important thing that they started doing around the 1960s was going to these World War I cemeteries and identifying Jewish German soldiers to give them the proper religious marker to rest under. For example, behind me, I don't know if you can properly see it, there's several different headstones that don't look like crosses. And those are stones for the Jewish German soldiers. In the First World War, there was roughly about 100,000 Jewish Germans who fought for Imperial Germany. And off the top of my head, I think maybe around 70,000 were casualties. I'll have to check that number. I'll add it in the description if I have it wrong. Yeah, that's a lot of individual lives who gave their lives for their country. And think about what happened 2 decades later to the Jewish Germans is always a tragedy to think about. As we take an overview of the cemetery, we can find several other stones of the German Jews soldiers. Because of the difference of the stone compared to the crosses, it's quite easy to identify them from a distance. So one really interesting part about this cemetery in Montaigu I is as you come behind this building behind me here, there's another field of German soldiers laid to rest in a completely different style. Here you have a headstone, and each headstone has 2 different names on them. Why this part of the cemetery looks different than the one behind me, I'm not entirely sure. It could be possible that these graves were brought here later on as they consolidated war cemeteries and put them into more places, but I'm not 100% sure about that. That would just be my guess. What is also a possible reality is that this part of the cemetery might have existed first, and then the larger part that we were looking at earlier was built later on. However, both possibilities are, realistic and could have been, so I'm not exactly sure, but that's my best educated guess. All right, so we just finished looking at Montaigu I. Now we're gonna go drive about a kilometer down the road and check out Montaigu II, which is another German war cemetery that shares the same name as this one here. So let's go take a look. So just about a kilometer up the road from Montaigu I is another German war cemetery that shares the same name. This is the German war cemetery Montaigu II. This is also where one of the stories that I want to share with you today, a gentleman of the name Franz Lorenz, lies at rest after he lost his life fighting during the First World War. Let's go and learn his story together. Franz Lorenz was only 19 years old when he lost his life. Franz Lorenz. The information I have on him is limited, but a surviving death card tells us a little bit more about him. It describes him as a soldier in the Armierungstruppe and the mayor's son from Vorder Buchberg. It also says that he died in June 1917 in his 20th year in the fighting near Mallercourt. And one line that really stands out in particular says, "Whoever knew him, loved him." It's a simple sentence, but it adds something human to what would otherwise just be a name, a rank, and a date of death on his stone. And at the end of the day, that's what makes a grave like this hit a little bit harder. Franz Lorenz was only 19 years old when he died, far, far from home, and now rests here in France more than a century later. He was only 19 years old. So it's a little bit strange doing this video, two different cemeteries into one, because normally I like to put each individual cemetery into its own video. But I felt that Montaigu I and II are close enough together and they both share a similar context. So I'm just going to cover the story of both of them in this one video. So I hope that's okay with you guys. Maybe one day I'll come back and make an own video of Montaigu II. But yeah, I hope we could learn something visiting the cemetery together. So Danny here from the German War Graves Commission is going to tell us a little bit about the quote right here that has a reference to the ancient Spartans. Danny?
Yes, I explained yesterday. So in many of the German World War I cemeteries, you find references that goes back to nationalist ideas. So with this saying here, it means wanderer, pause in reverence and tell the people that we died here as men, faithful for the homeland. So this is a reference to the Battle of the Thermopylae Pass. Quote, wanderer, go tell the Spartans.
So one of the big differences between the two Montaigu cemeteries is that Montaigu I is a massive cemetery, while Montaigu II is very small and condensed. And the reason for that being is both cemeteries were established while the fighting was still going on. But Montaigu II here was left alone. There were no extra burials other than small modifications, while Montaigu I was later expanded to include consolidated graves from all these surrounding war cemeteries to put them into one. So that's why Montaigu I has its massive size, and this here seems small in comparison. So that brings us to an end of today's video at the German War Cemetery here in Montaigu. It was definitely an interesting learning experience for myself, and we found some pretty heartbreaking stories, especially that with the relatives who came and left a letter for their family member. I want to thank you for watching, and if you thought that this video added some educational value or you just enjoyed it, please give a like, subscribe to the channel, and check out some of the other videos I made on this series. And also consider looking into the German War Graves Commission, who make places like this possible for us to visit. I'll see you guys in the next one, and thanks for watching.
It is easy to get lost in the scale of a war like this, in the numbers, the armies, and the battles, but places like this bring it back down to what war really does. Behind every grave was an individual life, and behind every loss was a family left to live with it. That human cost is something we should never lose sight of, and that is why it is important to continue to visit places like this.